Vayichar leMoshe ma'od. Moshe gets very angry. Vayomer el Hashem, al teifen el minchasam. Do not turn to their offering. Lo chamor echad mehem nosasi. I never took one donkey of theirs. V'lo areyosi es echad mehem. I never harmed any of them. Moshe Rabbeinu says, hey God, he doesn't say hey, he says, God, don't turn to their offering. I've never taken a donkey. In other words, I've never taken advantage of my position. Very difficult thing when you're in a position of authority, not to take advantage of your position. Do you know that somebody who is a kashrus mashgiach, you know what a mashgiach is? A supervisor. So I have a former student who's a supervisor for the OU. The OU is a kashrus organization in the United States. So he goes to these factories. He was working with the OU with Starkist tuna. And so he was at the factory. He told me he's not allowed to take a can of tuna he's not allowed to accept a can of tuna from the factory, because then it's seen as a bribe. You know, you're bribing the Mashiach. And so once you take it, your vision is distorted when you take a bribe. Often people in positions of authority, they abuse their authority. They have their authority, and their authority, as a result of their authority, they expect certain favors, certain things are expected of them, and so on and so forth. Moshe Rabbeinu says, listen, first of all, I'm completely clean. I've never taken a donkey. Number two, I've never harmed anybody. Now, if you were Moshe Rabbeinu, and you want to appeal to God and explain to God, listen, don't listen to them because I'm the good guy here. And you want to demonstrate something good that you've done, what would you do? If you were Moshe Rabbeinu, what would you do? Listen, I took them out of Egypt. I split the sea. I brought down the Torah. I mean, what more evidence do you need of a man's greatness? Right? No, you want to demonstrate your greatness. I never took a donkey. Why was Moshe Rabbeinu use that as an example of his greatness? You understand? Why would he use that as an example of his greatness if he could? So those of you who are in the Gemara, you remember we spoke about an incident that the Talmud says that there was a man named Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion. Now, Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion, there was a Roman decree that the Jewish people are not to study Torah. Even the Romans knew the importance of Torah study. It said not to study Torah. So Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion, in open defiance of the Romans, he gathered the Jewish people and he taught them Torah in public, in open defiance of the Roman, and he was doing that. And he came to see another great sage named Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma. And Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said to him, you're messing with fire over here. There's a decree. I'd be very surprised if they don't catch you and end up torturing you to death, which is eventually what happened to Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion. He was burnt to death. So he said to Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion, listen, you're in open defiance of the Roman. I'd be very surprised if you don't end up with a tragic death over here. So Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion said to Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma, well, okay, I don't mind. I'd gladly die. Just tell me, what is my portion in the world to come going to be? So Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said to Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion, well, in order to know that, you give me an example of something that you've done good in this world. So Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion says, well, okay, I was a charity distributor in my neighborhood. And on Purim, we give out money to the poor people. So Chanina ben Teradion said, I had some of my own money that got mixed in with the communal money. So I gave it away by accident. I gave my own money away by accident. And I never reimbursed myself from the communal fund. I just said, all right, I gave it away, let them have it. So Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma said, wow, you're going to have I wish my portion will be as good as your portion. That's what he said to him. That's what the Gemara records. Now, there's a very big question here. If you were Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion, and somebody were to ask you, give me an example of something good that you've done, and you're the one who's teaching Torah in open defiance of the Romans, what would you give an example? I've taught Torah in open defiance of the Romans. I mean, that's pretty good. If let's say somebody would ask you, you've done two things in your life. One of them is you've put on tzitzis, and the other one is you dived into the water to save somebody who was drowning at personal risk. And somebody says to you, have you ever done a big mitzvah in your life? Give me an example of something good you've done. What would you choose as an example? Yeah, I dove in. Everybody else was standing around. I dove in at great personal risk, just like the Torah says, and I saved somebody's life. Isn't that what you, or versus, well, I put on tzitzis. It cost me 45 shekels, and I put on tzitzis. Which one would you choose? You would choose. That's a lot more dramatic, a lot more, the effect seems to be greater effect, seems to be a bigger mitzvah. That's the one you would choose. So why does Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion talk about, well, my money got mixed up, so I gave away an extra $20 to tzedakah? Why don't you talk about the fact that you risked your life to teach Torah in open defiance of the Romans? That's the question. Rabbi Dessler asked that question. You know what the answer is? The answer is, all of us have two types of actions that we're involved in. We've all done great things. I'm sure sometime or other you've done something great. what you consider great, and we're all involved in our day-to-day living. Your true level is not measured by the great things you've done. Your true level of who you are as a person and what your station will be in the world to come is defined by what you do on a day-to-day level basis. In other words, if a person, you're going to be rewarded for everything, and the great things you get rewarded for too. But the ultimate level of the person, whatever his eternal existence is going to be relative to what his true level is, not some one-off. Imagine you knock on the door. My wife said to me after Cleveland won the NBA championship, my wife said to me, this is a great time to go fundraising in Cleveland. Like, people in Cleveland are in a great mood. So you knock on the door, you say, listen, we're collecting for the yeshiva, and some guy who just saw the end of the NBA game, he says, oh, well, he writes you out a check for $10,000. Right? That's not who he really is. That's not who he really is. Who he really is what he does when people knock on his door on a regular basis, coming around asking for money. Who you really are is how you behave in the lunchroom, what you do when you're standing in line, what you do with your roommate, how you treat your roommate, how you treat your family, how you treat your parents, how you treat your friends. That's who you really are. Once in a while, you dive in the water to save somebody's life. That's great, but that's not who you really are. Unless you're the person who's doing that on a regular basis. That's why Rabbi Chanina ben Teradyon, when he was asked, give me an example of something you've done, he didn't choose the giving up my life to teach Torah, because that's not what you do on a regular basis. When something I do, I'm the type of person who gives away an extra $20 if I actually threw in another $20 and it's stuck. I don't go and say, well, give it back to me. I'll let him keep it. That's who you really are. Moshe Rabbeinu chooses, as an example, when he wants to convince God that God should not turn to Dasan and Aviram. He should obey. He should turn to Moshe Rabbeinu. Is because Moshe Rabbeinu says, I never took a donkey from them. Seems insignificant compared to splitting the sea, right? But that's who he really is. That's the real level. Your real level is determined by the little things you do on a day-to-day basis. Remember the famous Rambam asked the question, if you have $1,000, should you give it all to one poor person, which would be great for him, or give $1 to 1,000 poor people? Now, $1 isn't going to really be significant in any one of those poor people's lives. But what should you do with your $1,000? Give $1,000 to one poor man, or give $1 to 1,000? What do you say, Ben? What would you do?
Probably 1,000, because with that he can change his life around.
Change whose life?
The poor man's life.
Okay, there's certainly a validity to that argument. Give 1,000 to one guy. Okay, that's certainly true. What do you say?
I would say that it all depends on the type of context that you want to live your life in. If you want to actually betterment mankind, then you would give it out as $1 increments to 1,000 people.
Okay.
If you're looking to have self-realization and self-worth, then you need to...
Okay, very good. So the Rambam makes it easier for us. Very good. The Rambam says, you hear what he's saying? Are you worried about the betterment of mankind? You're worried about the betterment of yourself. So the Rambam says, well, you know why you give tzedakah? That's why do you give charity? We think of charity in terms of the benefit of the poor man. That's what we think of it. Every mitzvah is in our benefit also. I'm giving the mitzvah that changes me. The act of reaching into your pocket 1,000 times will do more for you than giving away $1,000 in one shot. Sure, you'll better his that, no question about it. But I'm also a factor in the equation here. I'm also part of the mitzvah. The mitzvah it's supposed to do something for me. That's why, I will tell you a shocking statement. Any of you married? None of you are married except for me and Mr. Fogel. Right? Okay. So I'll tell you a shocker. Reb Chaim Vital was one of the great Kabbalists. Chaim Vital says that in the world of truth, when a person comes up there after 120 years in the world of truth, so it's the judgment day. So now a person has committed he's done a lot of acts of kindness in the course of his lifetime, right? You've done a lot of chesed, you've done a lot of kind things in your lifetime. Are you going to get rewarded for it? Theoretically, yes, they're supposed to be rewarded for it. But Chaim Vital says, it's not so fast, not so fast. You know what God's going to do? Is God going to take a look at first, how kind were you to your wife? If you treated your wife well, you'll get credit for all those other acts of kindness. If you treated the world well, but you were miserable to your wife, so you get no credit at all. You know why? Because if you're really concerned about kindness, so why weren't you kind to your wife? You're kind to everybody else. Sure, you want to make a good impression. That's why people meet at the office and always run off with each other. They dump their spouses and run off with each other. Why? Because at the office, everybody is on their best behavior and looks their best. Till they get married, then they split up too. because they realize now that we're married, this is Gehenna. Right? But everything is artificial. At the office, everybody's nice and everybody's sweet. Everybody looks at, wow, her husband must be a really lucky guy. His wife must be a really lucky lady. Right? Until you go home and meet his wife, who's got a big bruise over here. Right? Then you find out, why? Because she's not such a lucky lady, because he takes out all his frustrations on her when he gets home from the office, and vice versa. So a person, your real measure, the real level and the real test of a person, by the way, this is practical as well. The real test of your character is going to be when you're married, because then you got to deal with a wife and you got to deal with the kids, and if you're the type of person who's always flying off the handle, there's no end to it. Fly off every 5 minutes. You can be flying off. There's always something that's going to happen that's going to what do you call it? Right? It's going to tick you off. And if a person has to learn in the home, you could either be a monster or you could be an angel. And if you're going to expect everybody to march to your drumbeat at home, you're in for a very unhappy life. And you better, there's a famous story. This deer is running through the forest, and he's getting frustrated because his antlers keep getting caught on the branches. So he goes over and he brings an electric saw, and he walks over. He's ready to saw down some of the branches in the forest. So he sees this little old wise deer, the guy with the round glasses and a little beard, and this old wise, grasshopper, and he comes over, he goes, no, you got it wrong. He starts laughing. He says, what's so funny? He says, you got it all wrong. He says, instead of trimming the branches, why don't you trim your antlers a little bit? And you trim your antlers, you won't get caught on any branches. There are two ways. You're going to go around trimming the world's branches, there's not enough trimming to do. Trim your own antlers and you'll be okay. Because we are always got branches everywhere we go in our life. I don't know if you guys ever been to shul. I was just talking to my wife about this. When you go to shul, let's start off with what a man goes through in the course of the day. I go to shul, starts off with the guy sitting in my seat, right? So, okay, I won't sit over there. I'll sit somewhere else. I go and I sit down, and just as I sit down, another guy walks over and goes, shh, you're in my seat. Right now, I've been thumbed out at third base. You're out of there, okay? So I get up and go sit somewhere else. But this time I'm a little agitated, so I go to open the window. Somebody says, close the window, I'm cold. So you close the window, somebody else says, open the window, I'm hot. Right? Then you finally move somewhere else where you sit down, the chazin's going too slow. Right? Or the chazin's going too fast. Or the kid behind you is playing with his stender and he loses control and hits you in the back of the neck. Right? On Sukkot, you ever get poked by a lulav? By the way, whenever you go around the circle on Sukkot, don't ever stand behind a kid on Sukkot when you go around the circle, because the kid's lulav, the tip of his lulav is right at your eye level, right? So don't stand behind that kid. There's always something to get ticked about. You haven't even davened yet. That's for the first hour of the day. Then you come home and you got to find your slippers or your briefcase or whatever it is, and breakfast is not ready. Then you go to the bus or public transportation and it's late, and you got to deal with people. Then you got to get to work. You understand? Everywhere you go in the course of the day, your blood pressure could go through. You can set records. Be in the Guinness Book. You can go off the charts unless you trim your own antlers. I say, relax. There's also a person, and he's thinking about himself just like I'm thinking about myself, and therefore he wants what's best for him just like I want what's best. Guy cuts you off in traffic. Nerve, he cut me off in traffic. Oh, I see, you never cut anybody off in traffic. You're just Mr. Polite behind the wheel, right? You just never cut anybody off in traffic. Guy zips in and takes your parking space. You never hopped anybody else's parking space, huh? You never sat in anybody else's seat in shul. You get upset, somebody said, you understand, there's no end to it. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu says, you're measured by your small deeds. You're measured by your small deeds. That's the rule. Okay.
Why did Moshe Rabbeinu have to be told? Why did he have to tell Hashem to not to accept it?
It's a tefillah. It's a form of prayer. It's a form of prayer. Anytime Moshe Rabbeinu speaks on Kodesh Baruch Hu, it's a form of prayer. He's asking on Kodesh Baruch Hu for, in case they have a merit, I want you not to focus on that merit. Rabbi Meir Chodosh was the mashgiach of the Chevron Yeshiva. He was like the spiritual supervisor of the Chevron Yeshiva. And he was known as a man of very big Baal Musar, a man who was working on himself always. And Rabbi Meir Chodosh passed away, and he had been married over 60 years. So they asked his wife, what was it like being married to him? What was it like being married to Rabbi Meir Chodosh? So his wife said, it was like being in paradise for 60 years. Being married to him was like being in Gan Eden for 60 years. So every man should ask himself, what would his wife say about him if she was asked that question? It's like being in paradise for 60 years. Remember, one man's paradise is another man's Gehenna. Right? What would his wife say? What would his wife say if she was asked? Every man should ask himself that question. What would my wife say about? I know what not only that, it's always a good idea. Look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, how would I like to be married to me? That's also a very sobering question. How would I like to be married to me? I heard Rabbi Victor Miller once told a story about a woman who was on her deathbed, and her husband had mistreated her the entire lifetime. So he went to the deathbed and he said to her, on her deathbed, he said to her, I have to ask you for forgiveness. So she looked up at him and she said, I'm sorry, I cannot forgive you. And she died. Right, that's a bad thing to hear from your wife right before she goes. Right? That's a bad thing to hear. Now contrast that with Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was one of the he was one of the Gedolei Hador. He died about in when did he die? About maybe 11, 12 years ago. There were 300,000 people at his funeral. And yeah, there was even a secular policeman was there, secular Israeli policeman was there. And he looked around and he said, if I knew there'd be this many people at my funeral, I would drop dead on the spot. So Salman Auerbach had 300,000 people. He was one of the leaders of the generation. So there's a custom among Jews, when somebody passes away, whichever spouse dies first, the remaining spouse approaches the body and asks forgiveness. Because the assumption is that there's been some, spouses are married, there's been something inappropriate. So when his wife predeceased him. So when his wife passed away in front of 10 or 20,000 people, it came to the funeral, his wife's funeral. Rav Shlomo Zalman approached the mita, approached the body, and he said, we've been married over 60 years. You know as well as I do that I have nothing to ask forgiveness for. In over 60 years of marriage, there was never an unpleasant word exchanged between us. Therefore, I don't have to ask for forgiveness. I will only do so because it is the custom. But you know as well as I do that I don't have to. Okay. Somebody asked one of his children, how could it possibly be your parents were married for 60 years, and in over 60 years they never had a disagreement? You know what he said? He said, my parents had plenty of disagreements. My parents, how can you not have a disagreement? Somebody's coming from a completely different place than you, a completely different mindset. It's a completely different human being. You're a male. She said, how can you not have a disagreement? Of course we had disagreements. They had dozens of disagreements. But just because you have a disagreement doesn't mean you have to turn unpleasant. Why do you have to become unpleasant if you have a disagreement? Talk about it. Why do you have to raise your voice? Why do you have to insult people? Why do you have to become obnoxious about it? Why can't you just talk about it? You have a disagreement. Okay, so you have a disagreement. Not a big deal. And they had plenty of disagreements. A very big difference would be that. You understand? That's the real test of a person. I remember my wife the first time, again, this is why people wonder, why can't you know, finding out about people before when you date them, there's always going to be something you don't know after you're married. You're going to find out something you don't know. So I remember we had at the time, I think we had 4 kids. And one day I see my wife has got the kids, they're all dressed and and they're starting to march out the door. I said, where are you going? She said, to the dentist for the 6-month checkup. Whoa, what's with the 6 months checkup over here? My wife was raised in a home where they basically paid for the dentist's Rolls Royce. In our home, you went to the dentist if you were limping, you wouldn't pay, then you went, so now we got 2 different approaches. So now she's about to march off with the kid for a 6-month check. Whoa, this costs money just once. You understand? Now it's a disagreement. There's a disagreement over here. You may have a disagreement about how to flavor gefilte fish. My mother always made it sweet. Her mother always made it sour. Now what are you going to do with the gefilte fish? You understand? It's 1,000,001 things that you could disagree on. When do we renovate the home? When do you call for repairs? Do you call for repairs in advance, or you call for wait till something starts breaking? It's 1,000,001 things that could come up. Okay, they come up. So who said you have to become unpleasant, and who said you have to have your way? Who said you have to be right? Who said you have to have your way? You're not a baby. People always tell adults they tell you stop behaving like children. I disagree. When I see children fight, they say, stop behaving like adults, will you? Adults fight much more than children. Adults fight much more than children. Children fight and they get over it. Adults fight and they never talk to each other again. Right? That's what tests a person. Okay.